How would you advise people to combat the business case argument when people say it's just business that might be used against an ethical decision? So how do we switch people's mindsets so that these principles actually have potent influences on behavior?
So this is a really, really important question. And I wouldn't tell you that there's no cost financially to paying attention to ethics, but I would tell you that the cost to not paying attention are both financial, reputational, mental health, even potentially existential to the business. So I don't think anybody looks at Boeing today and says, that's where I'd like to be as a business. So one of the things is to make sure that the incentives are aligned. And there are a number of things I address in the book, but just for purposes of today's discussion, what do you incentivize? But not just at the top, all the way down an organization. I'm working with an organization right now where diversity and inclusion is a big ethics question. And we have structured something so that literally every single manager, including a 24-year-old manager who manages 2 people, has one diversity and inclusion objective. And the managers are also responsible for supporting their teams to achieve their objectives. The other thing is to be very clear about the consequences of failure to respect the principles. The other thing is to close the gap between senior management and the board, where you have kind of they go in a room, they make a big ethical decision, or a decision about ethics, I should say. There's kind of white smoke that comes out, and everybody else has to live with the decision, but they don't really understand why. And indeed, the book is designed to make sure that everybody in an organization can speak the same language. And it doesn't matter whether the person is ordering supplies for the cafeteria or whether the person is the CEO, so that the decision-making can be much more conversation throughout the organization. And then finally, using this framework, when you crystallize the consequences of the decisions, and you actually have to say, I'm going to live with the fact that factories are collapsing in Bangladesh because I haven't managed my supply chain, or I have to live with the fact that another plane could crash, or I have to live with the fact that the company could end up in a situation like Lehman Brothers, collapsing. All of a sudden, the risk reward, the cost benefit analysis shifts. So it isn't that there's no cost at all to ethics, it's that the cost of lack of ethics is so much greater.
Okay, and would you say these are mostly, like, you could frame this potentially, like the audience member talks about the business case. Can you always frame it as a business case, equated to either numbers or maybe tragic consequences, as you mentioned?
I love this question, and thank you so much for it to the audience member. The business case is a complicated question, but I do not believe, there are those who do, but I do not believe that, for example, you can say share price will reflect ethics, because there are so many other factors that drive share price, including, what Janet Yellen is going to say, right, in the U.S. So Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. So there's so many things that go into that. So I don't believe that you can have necessarily these direct things. What I do believe is that there's an increasingly direct relationship between, in terms of business case, your ethics and your ability to recruit. So my Stanford students this year are more than ever, 70% of them are focused on the ethics of the organization that they may go work for. I do believe it relates to retention. I do believe it relates to, the business case is about reputation. If you think of the cost of reputational mishaps, but also increasingly, society is just not tolerating lack of ethics. And we see it in a number of ways. We see it in employee walkouts, like the demonstrations with Amazon with respect to climate, or the demonstrations at Google with respect to selling certain technologies to the US military. So increasingly, the climate, different stakeholders aren't tolerating it. Shareholders are not tolerating it. Shareholders are asking, what are you doing about diversity and inclusion? What are you doing about fighting corruption if you're working in certain countries? And in the nonprofit world, it's the same thing. The business case is that if donors think that you're not behaving properly, or there's a lot of sexual misconduct running rampant in your organization, you're not going to have donor money. So I wouldn't say that you can always, run the numbers and see the positive numbers outcome or share price outcome, but there are definitely elements of the business structure and case there.